Some time ago on Twitter, I had posed the question whether or not there was such a thing as a survival horror RPG. Not an RPG with horror elements, or a survival game with RPG mechanics, but a true combination of the two, managing player statistics while also managing limited resources in a survival situation. People sent in a lot of great responses, ranging from the new World of Horror game in early access, inspired by the works of Junji Ito, Parasite Eve on the PlayStation, and Thai horror RPG Home Sweet Home. All of these more or less fit the bill of what I was looking for, but to my surprise, nobody mentioned the title that most fits my description. More confusing because it came out in 1993. The Legacy, Realm of Terror, is a true and honest horror RPG through and through, taking gameplay elements straight from titles like Dungeon Master or Ultima Underworld. It's also brutally, impossibly difficult. Full disclosure here, I didn't actually beat this game, despite playing it for probably close to a dozen hours. This is a game fully ready to kick your ass and walk away, but it's also got a great charm that kept me coming back. The Legacy part of the name comes from the game's primary setup. You play as one of a choice of characters, though ultimately the decision is mostly cosmetic. You can either use the presets, which I would highly recommend, or customize the character to fit your needs. However, it's worth noting if you customize a character, it removes any spells they have equipped, and spells are probably the best thing in this game. Once you have your character, you enter the Haunted Mansion, your legacy, that's been willed to you following its owner's mysterious death. Immediately things are off as you wander around running into zombies while mysterious laughter haunts you. And from here you'll have to survive the monsters of the house while solving puzzles and moving through the different areas and even into the titular Realm of Terror to stop a demon lord from entering our world. As I previously mentioned though, this game is nightmarishly hard. Healing items are rare and don't really do that much, and given that it's an RPG, if you run into bad luck, everything can immediately go down the drain in an instant. It's also an awkward game to play. It only uses the mouse for everything, even movement. You can't use the keyboard to just walk around. And while this does add to the tension, it mostly just made the game kind of really annoying to play. Performing actions and defeating monsters will earn you experience points that you can spend on a huge list of skills. However, I pretty quickly found that most of these skills were kind of useless, and given that this is a game that'll have you quick saving every few minutes, you can just save scum your way through. Normally, I wouldn't really recommend that, especially not for an RPG, but it's not like there's different outcomes based on how you succeed a check. You either pass or fail. It would have been nice to see a more fleshed out RPG system like Call of Cthulhu, but this was 93. RPGs were still kind of getting off the ground. Combat is probably the worst aspect of the game. If you get trapped by a monster, you can either try to hit it with one of your weapons or manually aim to be more selective. However, because this is an RPG, this amounts to an invisible dice roll and you frankly missing most of the time. Skills never really seem to play into this, as even with a leveled up blade skill, I just kept missing again and again and again. A single zombie can immediately end your entire run if those rolls don't play nice with you, and the game quickly turns into a quick save nightmare. You can avoid combat, which is probably what you should do, much like the Resident Evil games, but later enemies can just stun you or use range attacks, and it just gets worse as the game goes on. While the gameplay wasn't always great, the game's visuals are probably what kept me coming back time and time again. This is an extremely good Halloween game. The dark and foreboding halls of the mansion just begging to be explored. And it has that almost addicting quality to it that the Resident Evil games always managed to have. For the time, the graphics were really good, and there's a lot of visual flair, like the lights flickering on and off with lightning strikes, or how your character's avatar goes nuts when they see monsters. On top of strong visuals, there's the great sound design. The music is haunting and off-putting, and you can hear the monsters shuffling around the halls through doors, which really heightens the tension as you wait for them to pass so you can slip out. Unfortunately, going back to combat, it really doesn't have a whole lot of feedback to it, and this drags it down even further. But while you're just exploring the halls, the game has a really spooky vibe that'll do a great job of drawing you in. The Legacy Realm of Terror is a game I don't think a whole lot of people know about, and having tried to play it, I can kinda see why. It was the last game released by UK studio Magnetic Scrolls, who basically did nothing else, and it was pushed out by Microprose with no fanfare against some of their best games ever. The only reviews I could find for it nowadays were an article from Rock Paper Shotgun talking about it back in 2016, and a retro gaming blog from 2011. It was actually released last year on GOG and only came to Steam this month, but again, nobody seems to have picked up on it. It's a really difficult game, insanely punishing, and frankly just uncomfortable to play. But it's also a fascinating game and a real departure from the scant few other horror RPGs that I could find. If it wasn't just so weird and awkward to play, and if the RPG mechanics were just a little bit more fleshed out, this would be a true classic. I do actually recommend it to anybody that's interesting, and considering the full list price is like $6, it's well worth it if you're looking for a horror title. But it strikes me as a game begging to be rescued from the time in which it was created. Maybe a full remake, or even just somebody going through and updating it, would really give it a new life. As it stands though, it's a game truly trapped in its own realm of terror.